Cyberpunk Uncensored.
And hopefully we're live. Hello everyone, welcome to Tales from the Forlorn Dopes. I am Cybersmily with my co-host.
I am Wisdom. Greetings, programs. It's good to see you again this week.
Yes, so this is, I think, going to be outside of Seth's episode. This is going to be off, not necessarily a review kind of episode, in which I think was one of our main themes of the past 9 or 8, right?
We're up to 10. This is the anniversary issue episode.
We're about to become teenagers soon.
Yeah. We're just gonna do some random game input stuff on this one.
So today we came up with kind of some topics going forward for each show. We'll probably do some more reviews, interviews, and get into like game theory within cyberpunk. So tonight we're something that kind of, I don't know, I found interesting over the past few months is what's taboo when running a game. To me, there's been a lot of different posts, videos throughout social media and other media outlets around the subject. And the one thing that really kind of made me want to kind of address some of this and kind of get on my soapbox and talk is how a lot of these people will always tell you should never do this. And then they list out a bunch of things that you should never do. And in my opinion, no, you can do them. You're definitely going to do them, especially when you're starting out as a GM. You know, you're going to make those mistakes. And there are also things that, as a GM, as a referee, you should try, right, and experiment to weave a story. And I think by them saying you should never do this, really is, I hate ultimatums because there's always options. So I collected a pretty big list of the various topics that people have said. Some of them contradict themselves and kind of loop back on themselves. But I think for us, you know, I've shared this list with Wisdom here, but we can start diving into them. So do you want to just pick a random one, or do you want to, is there anyone...
I mean, I'm good however we want to run down the list.
Okay.
I will preface to say that you and I are not always on the same page as far as this topic goes. So this is going to be an interesting episode.
Right.
I remember when we first started talking about this was when the idea of like having for new gamers, new gaming groups, or like con gaming, having social contracts drawn up to say, hey, you know, this is what's your game going to include. What are you comfortable with? What would you rather not see in the game? What makes you uncomfortable? I am very much in support of such a thing. Some people can't always articulate what is going to bother them, or they don't feel comfortable discussing it with a bunch of strangers in the context of, hey, if I say this shit bothers me, is that going to come back to bite me in the ass? So I like the idea of social contracts.
Yeah, and I especially when you did that post, right? I gave kind of my point of view on some of it, and yeah, I got two different feedbacks from it, and some of it was definitely me taking a look at what my point of view, right? So, from a gaming experience, I've been gaming for 42 years. Situation and this whole new social contract, right, is definitely a new thing for 42 years of gaming. It's something that's come up recently, right? And old dogs definitely have hard time learning new tricks. It's just it takes time for an old dog to learn those tricks. Now, I see your point in that some people need it, right? And there are definitely specifics around it, especially when you're doing one shots at cons, or you're doing a one shot at a game store.
You shouldn't need something like this if you're running with your friends. You should hopefully your friends well enough to know that, hey, somebody experienced this traumatic event. I really probably don't want to fucking have stuff in the game that's going to immediately take them back to that state. You should know your friends, but I don't think that's what these lists are for. I don't think that's what these contracts are for. I think they're for people who are gaming with people they've never met, new people at a gaming store, con gaming, online gaming with strangers. I know a lot of that goes on with Cyberpunk Uncensored, our delightful host run by Rob Milligan. I would assume that with all the people they play with, that there's some kind of hey, these are the concepts we're comfortable with. These are the ones we're not. I would assume there's at least some kind of conversation in that regard.
Yeah, and like I said, it's new to me. So even as recently as 2 years ago, when I started going to a game store and started showing up to various D&D games, I still didn't have that session zero of what's acceptable, right? Or what topics are kind of off limits when running a game. So it's just, to me, it's very new concept to me. And because I've never had to do that before, because I think we were talking a little bit before this, that my ideas, and I'm a bit optimistic, although I'm quite pessimistic in other ways, but I'm optimistic that, most gamers I've met have some type of common decency, right? So they're not going to do certain things to each other, or the GM's not going to do certain things. And yes, I've heard the horror stories, and yes, I'm not saying they didn't happen. They most definitely did happen. But I've never encountered them,
Tabletop gaming falls into the same circle as comic books and video gaming. It's just that they're not the same, but they fall into the same circle. You can go into the same stores and meet the same people. And I would have agreed with you until about 10 years ago, when when Gamergate was a thing, and Comic Book Gate and all this other stuff. I don't think that I don't give anybody the benefit of the doubt that they're decent anymore. They have to. I have to see them being decent, and I have to see them being decent in situations where other people aren't. Yeah. So, if that makes any sense, with the amount of gatekeeping I'm seeing, and racism, misogyny, from people who I never would have expected it from, who are now just wearing that on their sleeve like a badge of honor. I don't give anybody the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff coming out recently is just mind-blowing. With that whole thing. Digital craze kind of brings up a good point in that and I agree with this, and I was going to talk about it, is when you're dealing with subject matter within a game, right? There's various games that have certain subject matter, right? So for me, Dungeons and Dragons is about the hero defeating the dragon, saving the princess or the prince, you know, and doing good within the world of Dungeons and Dragons, right? Becoming the hero. Whereas, and like, for example, Paranoia is all about having complete mayhem fun and being as ridiculous as you possibly can. Cyberpunk,
computer loves you.
Yes, computer. Never question computer. I am happy computer runs the world. Cyberpunk is a step darker, right? Especially when they came out with the drugs, and it's all like sex, drugs, and rock and roll type of thing. That to me brings into a darker element, and to me, I feel that, you know, cyberpunk, when you talk about dystopian, you're really talking about subject matters that are very dark, and can be very very taboo nowadays, let's just say. And then you get into like crazier games, like, you know, like the various horror games. Cthulhu is kind of like in the upper echelon of tolerability, but, you know, talking about other horror games, they can go even darker, right, into other subject matter. So for me, you know, when I look at that social contract and saying I am now limited to how dark my dystopian can be, right, it is offsetting for a GM when I first read that, right? Because it's,
you're looking at it through your own eye,
right? And then not trying to, I'm trying to tell a story with the players, right? And even though I've seen a lot of people talk about its collaboration, yada yada yada, really it boils down to the GM giving that story and pushing that story. Yes, the players can change where the story goes, but ultimately the story is the GM, right? And that is the person who has to control where the themes and subject matter really go. And for me, you know, it's a form of entertainment, gaming. So
I mean, GMs create the world, the players react to it.
Right. And gaming is a form of entertainment. If I read a book that has very dark subjects, depending upon how well written it is and depending upon where the author is going with those dark subjects, because I've read, you know, basically, you know, people who are just having rape fantasies while they're writing a book is just ridiculous, and I will stop reading that book. But there's other situations that are very dark that can happen in a book, but it still leads to
everybody's
a book,
got their own comfort levels, and that's what that's what the social contract is about, is like, hey, these are my comfort levels. If we're going to go beyond these comfort levels, well, understand that I may just leave the game because of it. That this is not where, because like you said, the game is supposed to be fun, and if it's not fun for everybody, I mean, nobody wants to water down their stuff to the point of, you know, water. Sorry, I had a complete brain fart there. Nobody wants to water down their stuff too far, but at the same time, you don't want to make your friends or potential friends feel uncomfortable or excluded, and that's what the social contract is about. It's about figuring out that those comfort levels, those limits to what other people are going to find acceptable before they get up and walk, because it's not fun for them. Like, if it comes to a game and they're living out a trauma, that's not going to be fun for them,
right?
By that same token, you know, when I first looked at that list, I saw some things on it that I were like, wow, that's I agree with the list, and I think that's kind of ridiculous. But I don't know what other people might have been through. And I think the point of having those ridiculous things on there is some people have lived through some weird stuff, and it's left some impressions on them.
Right.
So what might be fine for 99.999 infinity% of gamers out there, you might meet that one guy who, an ice cream truck ran over my little brother in front of my face. Please don't put ice cream trucks in the game. I can't say no to that. I can't be all like, I'm going to put in an ice cream truck just to fuck with that dude. I mean, but we're getting off topic.
Right. So Capricious Nature, he completely disagrees
Capricious
with us all.
is agreeing with both of us, I guess, somehow.
Or no, he's completely disagreeing with with what we're saying.
Yeah, with both of us, which is weird because we're taking diametric views on this. Kind of.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're specifically going against Digital Craze. Again, Digital Craze has his table, his way of doing things.
Sure.
It's fine. But from my point of view is, and again, I'm not saying that you have to do this session 1, and I'm not saying that you're going to do this to new players, right? When you approach these dark topics, right? It is something that so there's, and I think I kind of, in my old age of experience and forgetting about being new and young and experienced with running and doing games, I think for me there is definitely a maturity level on some of these topics. Sure. And there's also a maturity level on how you approach those topics, right? Like Digital Craze mentions, sex within his game is kind of Cinemax versus hardcore porn. I'm even more to Fade to Black type of
yeah, I'm definitely guy. Fade to Black. Just because narrating sex to a bunch of dudes, I'm a pretty liberal guy, but I have my own comfort levels, and that's not that kind of pushes my own personal comfort levels. I don't want to role play a sex scene with other dudes. I just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
More power to those who can.
So we're not saying that you shouldn't do this. And again, I'm growing as a person always, and for me, this is kind of a new thing about the social contract in the beginning of the games.
What does Cyber Psycho R wording mean?
Not quite sure.
Okay.
So I think when you're dealing with new people, I think there is that expectation that you should have. Saying his game is hardcore, not softcore, Fade to Black. Right. So you can disagree with Digital Craze. Whatever works at his table works. People who...
If people are okay with the game, with his group, that's between him and the group. I mean,
yep.
That's the whole social contract thing is there to decide for new people who aren't familiar with each other, or even for people who are familiar with each other but don't want to have to discuss their past trauma or why, this fucking triggers them, which is completely legit. I couldn't imagine wanting to tell a bunch of sweaty people in a gaming group basement all about the worst thing that ever happened to me and why that's personally triggering for me. I mean, no matter how good a friend somebody may be, there may be something I don't want to talk to them about.
Right.
Just say, hey, this isn't cool.
And let's not get So let's not get into complete specifics. So the R word, right? Which Digital Craze is responding to exactly what that means. I've used that topic in a game many, many years ago. It wasn't done to the players. It was done to an NPC, and basically the person who did it got what they deserved. Let's just say by the players. And
yeah, the player. Oh, okay. I thought you were saying a player was committing these acts.
Nope.
Like they would be told to leave right then and there, never come back. In my game, in my house.
Right. So yeah, I agree that there's certain things, like you said, child abuse. I played a character many, many years ago who killed children, but that wasn't because he enjoyed it. That was because the kids killed half the party and were about to kill the rest of them. Although killing the one child kind of prevented the rest of the children from stopping it.
Things we got away with and we allowed ourselves to do it in the name of fun when we were younger are not necessarily the things we do now that we're older and have seen more of the world and the horrors that it contains.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
as a young gamer, I did some horrifically horrible things. I mean, horrifically horrible. It's just awful. I very much like to think I've moved on from that.
Right. And I think it goes with the maturity of the GM and the maturity of the players, you know. So let's move on.
And the group as a whole, like there's a group dynamic that you're gonna vibe into or not.
So I think to end this particular area of social contracts, I can see it as a good thing. I've never had to use it in the past. I've never been at a table that needed it, or I should say, the only time I've had that was when I first started playing in Panda Reservoir's group, and that was the first time I've experienced it. But I'm not against it. I just, again, like I said, it's kind of an old horse. I mean, trying to.
I don't do con gaming. I don't run one shots. I wouldn't even know how to approach that. But I see it as a useful tool. And for my game, I started running games online. I've talked about that before. And when I start with a new player or a new group, I let them all know, look, if there's something you're not comfortable with, just let me. You don't have to bring it up in group. You don't have to make a public thing. Just send me a message saying this is what I'm not comfortable with, and I will try to cater the game to that, even if it's something I don't agree with. I will at least give it some thought, and I will try and make that work for you.
And I think if a player does bring it up in your game, ignoring it, you should never. Well, not you should never do, but you're gonna do it because you're gonna mistakenly do that. But you know, it's definitely something you should take as feedback and apply it to your game.
I'm not going to get into any specifics, but I'm going to try and give an example of what I'm talking about. Recently, well, not even recently, I once had a player who had a problem with something the other players were doing. Now, what the other players were doing didn't affect this player directly, and what they were doing wasn't harming any of the NPCs or anything else. They just were uncomfortable with the subject matter. And I gave it some thought, and my final consensus was, look, it's part of the game. They're playing their characters. They're not harming you. They're not harming anybody else. They're not even harming themselves. They're just doing behavior you personally don't like. It's not what's the word? It's not malignant. It's not malicious. It's just something you don't think is cool. So I'm not going to tell them to stop doing that.
Right.
If you're not comfortable with that, you can make up your own decisions on how you want to react to that. But if they were doing something that was malicious, that was causing some trauma of some kind, my reaction would have been different. I would have probably taken steps to, curb that behavior in the game. And that's just an example of, it's the GM's call at the end. Like, you are going to decide, where that line of sacrifice is between the story you're wanting to tell, and the level of comfort that your players have expressed.
Yeah,
and that's the line there, that you'll place that line where you will and live by it.
Right. And again, I brought it up, and let's move on to different topics, because we have several. I think we've been talking for about 20 minutes, and it's definitely a road that can lead into. You can discuss this forever.
It's a whole thing. Sorry, I apologize.
No worries. So the other point that kind of really irks me when I see this and hear people complaining about it is the subject matter of taking away players' agency, railroading, or just using cutscenes as a GM. To me, when you say you should never do this, I disagree, because
I won't say never.
Yeah, and again, I think one of the problems is when people talk about player agency, they really don't. They have it in their mind of what that means, whereas I have it in my mind something that might be completely different. And I think that's one of the other problems with some of these points is they don't always clearly define exactly what you should never do, right? For me, player agency, or taking away the player agency, is, and I've seen this comment always followed by when they said you should never take player agency away, is then, if you're doing this, then why don't you just write a novel? Taking away player agency is not just taking away the player's decisions at times. It's about, as a GM, to move a story along. It's also about giving some type of background to the situation, and also setting up the scene within your game. Right, so one concept of taking away a player's agency is, okay, group, you all wake up naked, bound to gurneys in an operating room. What do you do? Right?
See, to me, that's not taking away player agency. That's just shit that happens to the characters.
Some people would say that's
shit
taking away.
To the characters is, yeah. Some people say a lot of things. I am in full agreement with you on fuck those people. For me, taking player agency is me telling you what your character is feeling or what your character is thinking. Me making the decisions. Me making your character's decisions for you. That's taking away player agency. Bad shit happening to your character. Well, that's just shit that happens. Some of it is more dickish than others, and it should. Like removing all the idea that your character wakes up strapped to a gurney bed or in a jail cell somewhere with none of their shit, that is such a staple of cyberpunk and just gaming in general that I don't know how you even approach that as, oh, they took away my agency. No, they didn't. That's just the way the story starts.
Well, I've had players in which I've taken right. So example, right, and again, taking away player agency also includes like cutscenes, right? So I've had situations where I say, okay, this event's going to happen in 2 weeks. Okay, we cut 2 weeks. Not many times, but there's been times in which players will argue me saying, stop, we want to do something during those 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay, what are you going to do? Well, I don't know. Okay, so you're not doing anything. Let's cut 2 weeks. No. Give me time to think about it. I got 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay, do you want that real time?
I mean, we can stop the game and I'll go watch TV and play video games until you figure out what you want to do. That's fine by me. I can entertain myself. Yeah, no, I get you. Some of the ideas of what constitutes, player agency and what doesn't are kind of out there.
And I think when people say, "Oh, you should never do this," they really don't give clear examples of what is taking. They do give maybe one or two examples of what taking player agency is versus moving the game along, right? Or setting the scene, or doing these other, game master tricks of the trade to present a game, right? And I think that's one of the problems that I've noticed with a lot of these people who say these things, is they often give very limited examples or give examples where it contradicts it, right? So, like we just talked about, showing up in a tied to the bed, you're stripped of all your equipment. That's not taking away player agency.
That's how the game starts.
Exactly.
That's the start of the story. That's the event that happens. I mean, when you see it it always makes me wonder, like when they see this on a video game or when it happens in a TV show, do they get mad at the screen? Or like, oh, that would never happen. I'm like, yeah, it happened. Keep with it.
Yeah, and I think people view that role-playing games should be more sandboxed than a video game, and they are. But there's still limits, right?
I mean, in sandbox games, stuff happens to your characters. Happens all the time. Hell, you play Cyberpunk 2077, there's a part of the game where, if you do the wrong thing and watch the wrong brain dance, you wake up naked in the bathtub. It's that prevalent. It is that standard that it's represented in the video game.
Or you eat and drink at this meal. Guess what?
The biggest sandbox games, that kind of shit happens all the time in GTA, Fallout, whatever. You always get your shit back. And if you tell me I'm waking up and there's no chance I can ever get my shit back, we'll probably have a problem. Unless your storytelling is just really fantastic. But even then, you're like, I really liked my shit.
Yeah, capricious nature. And that is always, to me, and it's not necessarily a taboo, but GMs who are players can often be the worst players because either they're rules lawyers or they get the attitude of, this is not how I would do it.
This is not how I would do it. Oh my God. Not only do I see that in other people who are both GMs and players, it's a struggle I've had to come to grips with of my own.
Yep.
Especially when I play with somebody else running Cyberpunk, I'm constantly wanting to but no, Arasaka would do this and they have this equipment. And I'm like, I have to keep my mouth shut. This isn't my game.
And it took me probably 20 years of my gaming experience to shut my mouth and let the game and enjoy the game and, get involved with the game. Worst example I ever had, and something that, it was a very interesting situation, was the first time I gamed at a con with Mike Pondsmith. And I forget what it was that he was doing, but it was like, that's not how the rules are written. I bit my lip before actually voicing that out loud.
From other players who've played it at Mike's table, like you could argue with the creator of the game. I want to see video of that. I do. The closest we've come is when that one chick,
the other YouTuber.
Yeah, the YouTube chick. Yeah, the YouTube chick tried to call out Mike and correct him on his own material, and I was just like, Jesus Christ. Like, would you do that to Stephen King? Would you go and be like, well, in The Shining, this happened, so it shouldn't happen this way in the movie? I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. So, on to another taboo that I've seen posted a lot is treating players unequally, not to show favoritism with certain players. And I think that also branches into not just your friends, right, and your girlfriend, and giving them a little more attention than the other players, but it also is favoriting people who are more involved in the game, right?
That's the thing right there. It's hard to like focus on people who don't want to be the focus of the game or don't know how to be the focus of the game. It's a struggle. I try very hard never to show favoritism, but you know, when people are talking all the time, you tend to gravitate to the people who are talking all the time. Yep. The shy, quiet kid in the corner who never says anything, especially in a digital environment, sometimes you kind of forget that they're there. And then when you do realize, oh my God, I've been ignoring this person, you feel really bad about it. And there might be any number of reasons why I'm speaking.
I think one of the main reasons why that happens. Yeah, and I think one of the main reasons why that happens is, again, it's one of those other points that I found, which was taking on too many players, right? So as a GM,
that can be a problem.
You know, I've been in situations where, you know, one day I told a game shop, hey, I'm going to run Cyberpunk, and they're like, oh, great, a lot of people are interested. I'm like, that's cool. I'll have like 6 people or maybe 5, you know, because at certain cons I would get maybe 1. So when I showed up and there's 12 people sitting at the player table, I'm like, I can't do this. And all the players started ripping me a new one about, what do you mean you can't do this? Can't you run this game for 12 people? I'm like,
people at once.
Sure.
That causes my eyes to start twitching.
And I was like, sure, all right, let's start this off. Again,
triggering of right there.
After 3 hours of rolling off characters, I started the game, and the game was basically robbing them all of their agency. They wake up in an alley, stripped of all their equipment, and, you know, a bunch of gangers are about to attack them. So they were able to fight them off, and, you know, of course, because of the ruckus, they called in the cops, and players decided, hey, let's fight the cops. And I was like, okay. They open up with their assault rifles.
That's going to have some consequences.
And you guys have no armor, and half of the group is dead. And of course, half the players were like, "This game sucks."
I'm like, all the problems right there.
A, he wanted me to GM 12 players. B, you decided to shoot at cops, and you didn't think that this was a bad idea. And yeah, so know your limit of players and strictly strictly keep with that, right? So for me, usually I run between 4 and 5 players. 6, as long as the 6 are into it. And again, I don't try to show favoritism. However, it often leads to it because it's the people I favor, not necessarily people I'm friends with, but I favor people who feed into my story, which again alienates certain people.
the more you're invested in the game, the more I'm invested in not only the game, but your character. And this is my opinion on knowing your limits. Personally, I think the fewer players you have, the better the quality of a story you're going to be able to tell. With the fewer players, the more character growth and character development on an individual basis you're going to see. Whereas with a larger game, basically, I mean, you're telling a story, but you're basically moving from one event to the next. You don't have time for the character development on an individual basis because you've got to move this herd. It's like herding sheep. You like move along, little doggies. Get to this place so we can have this event that furthers the story. You can't have like with a small number of players. If they want to take a break from the action and spend a session like shopping or walking around town, seeing the sights, you can totally do that, and it's not gonna really impact the overall narrative. In fact, it will feed into it. It will make those characters stronger. With larger groups, and I've run both small groups and large groups, you lose that individual character development. And it's the same with like one shots and con games. It's why I don't run them. Because that's what I play for, is that character development, the overall like story involving those characters, as opposed to just the story about the events. I don't. The events are cool, but the events are there to make the characters shine.
Yep.
So I prefer smaller groups. The smaller, the better. Hell, I ran one of my best friends on a solo campaign for years. I'd still be running that campaign if life allowed it. And he did the same for me. Optimally, I think to still get that individual character development and still be able to get the most out of gaming, you want 3 to 4 players.
Yep.
Anything more than that, and you start eating into that.
Yep.
I've run large groups. The games didn't last. There's never any point to it, as far as I'm concerned. I think the largest group I ran on a consistent basis was 8 people, and it only lasted like 2 or 3 months before people just started dropping out.
Yeah, you got to know your group, right? And I think it's the system you run and the story you're running that also helps, right? If you're just doing, for me, if you're doing a D&D game that you're just doing dungeon crawls with, I can handle 8 players in that.
Even then, I almost hate it more. I almost hate large groups more for that reason. Combat takes so goddamn long. And the more people you add to that, the longer it takes. Everybody, like, it's good gaming etiquette to pay attention to what's going on, to not be staring at your phone. I stare at my phone all the time, but I mean, it's good etiquette not to do that. It shows respect for your game master. I still respect my game master. I just have a ridiculously short attention span.
But so like for me, when I talk about like, it's a dungeon crawl with eight players, I have no problem with giving them 20 seconds, and if they can't give me an action that they're doing, they lost their action. And yes, that player gets pissed off at me, but I'm like, you're not paying attention to the...
Actually,
go ahead.
Doing that shit can take so much longer, like figuring out the effects of like an area effect spell and the damage it does to like the 15 enemies who are there. Like that shit can take a long time. And when there's like 8 people at the table, man, an hour can pass. And I have literally spent hours waiting for my turn to come back around. As
a GM, you got to push that and also penalize bad behavior. So if I go to a player, and they're looking at the table and figuring out and getting feedback from players, I'm like, all right, you're not prepared. This is your turn. You've decided to wait until now to figure out what you're doing because we have 8 players at this table and you've had 5 minutes to think about what's going on and seeing the situation unravel. You're not prepared. You don't even know what spell you're doing or what effect you're doing. I'm passing you on, right? I
the worst example
don't have the time
I
for
can
that.
think of. We were playing 3rd edition 3.5. And I mean, the player was completely prepared, but completely within the rules, that character had was able to pull off 12 actions in one fucking round. Like, they were a wizard at fucking figuring this shit out. But even he was completely prepared for his round, but his round still took 45 minutes just for him to to get through.
So,
and when there's 8 people doing that, yeah, I'm going to sleep, man.
yeah, right. Okay. So we agree that, limiting the amount of players is definitely something that is a bit of taboo and you probably shouldn't do. Favoritism.
Yeah, I mean, if you do it, just be aware of what you're getting into.
Yep.
I'm not going to say never do that. The things I say never do are pretty freaking slim.
Right.
But be aware of it and be aware of your own limitations.
But to the main topic of favoritism, I think you should avoid favoritism. I think you're not going to get away from it because of those outside game relationships that definitely are going to have an influence on you when you are gaming.
I mean, it's gonna subconsciously affect your game, whether you want it to or not. It will happen. Yep. What I try and do, I mean, there's not enough time in a session to give everyone the equal amount of attention. What you can do is you can have a session that, hey, this session, everybody's going to have something to do, but the majority of the actual screen time, we're going to focus on this character, these characters over here, and then next session we'll focus on these characters over here, or this individual character get their own spotlight time. Yep. So while you can't avoid favoritism, you can mitigate it by recognizing when it happens and then spreading that love out.
Yep. And I think we both agree that favoritism to people who are buying into the story and buying into the game kind of is a borderline. Yeah, you probably should do that.
That's what keeps your game running.
Yep.
People who buy into it, yes, the more they buy into it, the more invested they become, the better your game is. So yeah, you're gonna focus on that.
Right.
You're gonna be like, oh. And if somebody's not buying into it, try and figure out what they will buy into it, and then throw some of that into the mix. Give them the opportunity to shine.
Yeah.
Sometimes it won't ever happen. Sometimes they're just happy to show up, listen to the action every now and then, roll a dice, and sit there and smile. And sometimes that's just who they are and the best you can hope for. And there's nothing really wrong with it. Other times, they might not have the social skills to really open up. I played with someone who, they were just slightly on the autism scale, and they didn't understand social cues. So what I did is I'd kind of geared their characters' interactions towards instead of having them describe to me what they would do, I would have them go ahead and make the rules, and with their permission, I talked to them outside. I would then describe how their character is performing this task, or what they might be saying, because they didn't have the capability at the time to do that. And at the end of the game, they were like, this is actually helping me in my interactions outside the game to know what these social cues call for.
Yep. And to kind of trail off that, and it's kind of a little bit off topic, is, I'm a bit of an introvert, right? So yes, it's kind of hard, especially with a new party, it takes me a session or two to really find my character and find the group dynamics to actually start feeding into the story, right?
Yeah.
However, at a con game, it's weird because I'm a little different in that situation, in that I'm a more extrovert in a con game because yes, these are probably people I'm never going to meet again. So I don't mind taking away some of my anxiety away.
Never have to worry about it.
Right. So I can be a little more outspoken and play the character a little crazier than if I was in a campaign that's going to last a little longer, because I know, I'm still figuring out, especially if there's new players at the table, figuring out what their play style is and feed off of that, right? And also, if it's a new GM, feed off of that new GM and try to figure out what's the balance as a player, to figure it out. So I'm sure the GMs who have me as a player are like, wow, he's kind of quiet for the first, 4 or 5 sessions. But I do eventually grow into it because it's that new group and that new friendship and a new social interaction that you got to deal with it.
Car smell.
So I think for that situation where you're talking about, you definitely want to give the person some time for sessions in which, if they're not still coming out of their shell, talk to them off on the side, or see, are you having a good time? What's going on? Or you just prefer to be, the silent observer and part of the group.
As with 90% of the other problems, it always comes back to communicate. Communicate with your players. That's that's rule number 1 for dealing with any problem: communication.
And that is one subject that I don't think people really address. Well, there's the communication of getting a social contract, but the continued communication, I think was never really put as a mistake, a taboo, or any of these other things that people are listing, is not talking to your group.
As gaming moves away from the environment that we grew up in, where it was almost, you either gamed with friends or you went to a con. Those were really your 2 options.
Yep.
I mean, there were weird play-by-mail guys, but I don't think I ever actually have even met one of those guys. I know it was a big thing. It's just not anything I have any experience with.
I used to play by post on Night Owls, BBS.
Oh man, I remember that. But yeah, I mean, when we grew up, it was in person.
Yep.
Or even at cons, it was in person. There was no digital presence when we started. Like, the internet wasn't even a thing. As we move further along, it becomes more of a gaming with people you've never actually spent any physical time with. That becomes more and more of a thing. And even with people you do spend time with, there's not the same level of free time that there used to be. Even among the younger people who are still in school, their lives are, for the most part, so curated that the free time they have is a commodity. Whereas, when I grew up in high school, I got out of school and nobody cared what I was doing until it was time for dinner. As long as my homework got done, nobody cared. My brother was, as long as he didn't end up bloody on the floor somewhere, nobody cared.
Yep.
So it's harder. The communication, the personal communication, doesn't come as easily now, and I think that's where a lot of these problems are coming from. Like everybody communicates on a worldwide grand scale, and we spend all this time on social media and whatnot, but the personal communication has become almost an aside for people, where it's a skill that's dying out, or at least taking a back seat to the impersonality of social media. And that's why these contracts are becoming a thing, or one of the reasons is because that personal communication, it's hard for people. It causes people anxiety.
Yep.
Anyway, well, let's
move on.
You said something earlier about off-screen events or cutscenes, things like that.
Yeah.
I know lots of GMs who have used them, and they've used them to great effect.
Yep.
I personally don't use them. I don't like them. I think they're kind of metagamey. That's not to say I haven't enjoyed the games that they've been used in. It's just, if my character doesn't see it, I don't want to see it. Otherwise, I act on subject matter that my character doesn't have. Like, I do it subconsciously. I can't help not knowing that. It's a weird thing. I'm not going to tell people not to do it. I'm just saying I don't personally.
Yeah, and for a quick rebuttal on that whole subject is, as a player, I don't mind it. I find it really odd that some players do mind it. But for me, as a player, I know how to GM, right? And I've been in that place, and I know the difficulty of that. So as a player, I give a little more leeway to the GM to do what they want to do, to see the story they're building.
I don't get upset when it happens.
Yep.
It's just, you can't have that happen. You can't give me this information and then act like I don't have this information.
Yep.
Like,
so all the players who are listening to us, all the players who are listening to us, let the GM make their mistakes. Let them do what they think is going to be done. Yes, you can butt in, and if they're taking it to an extreme, in which you're not having fun, you definitely should give feedback on that. But let's move to another taboo, as it was, which I think you will definitely have an opinion on, and something that has been brought up in several areas that I've seen, from various YouTubers who say you should never do this, is not being prepared. That is one thing that a lot of YouTuber says a GM should not do. So, for me, it depends on the system, and it depends on the media I'm using to present, right? So, for example, if I'm doing an in-game session, depending upon the game I'm doing, I will not always be prepared. I will wing it. I will fly through it. If it's a one-shot, I can do a one-shot off the cuff, no problem. The great thing about being unprepared as a GM, it can lead into a game or into a campaign that you will actually start preparing for.
Maybe.
However, the problem with being prepared is, especially if you're of the mindset of keeping it a sandbox sandbox environment, players will ignore everything you prepared and go off the rails.
That's why I tell people I don't prepare.
And I think
the problem.
Go ahead.
I mean, the older I get, well, I'm not even going to say that. Until the pandemic, until I started running things online, preparation was something I did rarely. And usually, even when I was trying to prepare for something, the preparation really was never much more than, okay, I've got a very loose idea for a plot. I want it to have these events happen, and that's my preparation. I don't. As I run digitally now, as I run online, I try to have maps ready. I try to have ideas. The two campaigns that I'm running, they required a lot of prep initially, just because the Glass Road campaign, it all takes, like, the characters all live and work from this one giant vehicle cruising the irradiated wastelands of the Middle East, exploring it, looking for safe trade routes, blah blah blah. But it all has to take place on this thing, so it has to feel like something they could live on. There were NPCs, like just a ton of NPCs who lived on it with them. The nature of the game called for a lot of preparation that I couldn't just wing. But when it came time to actually running the game, yeah, I was winging that shit. The Nomad game I'm running now, the Wasteland Express, or the Vagabond Express that just cruises in between the Nomad markets, that requires some... I'm trying to put as much planning into that as I can. I try to have a weekly, like, this is going to happen this week, and these are the NPCs who are going to get on the bus. These are the ones who are going to get off, blah, blah, blah. You can either interact with them or not. That's up to you. Shit's happening. But even then, I often just fall back onto winging shit because that's where I'm the most comfortable. The more I try and plan stuff, the more I try and include that in the game, to the point that sometimes it feels forced. The players, as you said, they'll have their own fucking ideas of what to do, and all your plans go out the window, but you're still trying to, like, duct tape it to the side of whatever car they're driving down the highway on. You're just, super glue, we'll stick that on there somewhere. It'll work somehow. Right. And it becomes this frantic mess of you trying to include stuff. Whereas if you're just winging it, characters do what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
So
and I think
3 years winging it.
And Capricious Nature brought up a good point, right? In which he said when he first started, he over-prepared. And that's another taboo mistake that some YouTubers are presenting is excessive world building, right? In which you do too much preparation. But I think from my view is, yes, I've done that excessive world building, as it were, or excessive...
I don't know anything prepping about excessive world building. I don't know what the fuck you guys are talking about. What is this foreign concept?
Meaning, all right, I'm going to map out every single NPC within a bar, right? Type of thing. I'm going to map out, a corporation with all the people and all the positions filled out, right?
No, I mean, for those who don't know, my site, Datafortress2020, is 90% world building to just ridiculous levels. I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm telling you, I've wasted a lot of my life doing this.
You did not waste your life. I love all of it. Especially your combat zone, man. The detail you wrote in that, like, was it 20, 30 pages worth of juicy goodness?
Jesus, just NPCs alone.
Yeah, so I do not mind that stuff, but that's where you're getting into the over prepping, too much world building. If you do that,
obviously, I am going to disagree that over prepping your world is a problem. Trying to force all of that into what the players actually see, that is the problem. Let the players discover your world naturally.
Agreed. And you can always...
Write the source book afterwards.
Yep.
After the campaign.
Yep. And you can use those ideas in those situations again. It might take, it might be further along in the campaign, or it might be take a couple decades before you present it to your group.
If the players get invested in your world and you do it naturally, they might not explore it with those characters, but the next game you run or whatever down the road, they're going to explore the rest of it. They're going to see as much of your creation as possible, and hell, they're going to look for the edges of that creation. Don't get offended by that. Don't get offended by them going off the rails. Instead, run with that shit. Create more world. There you go.
Yep.
And then when it comes time to write your source books or whatever,
or create your website,
create your website, write your novel, then you've got all that crap the players did that made you flesh that stuff out. Like, make those guys work for you.
So I think and again, the first part of this topic was not being prepared. It's definitely not something you should never do. It's definitely something that should always be part of your...
find your comfort level.
Yeah, and it definitely find your comfort level, right? And I had a recent talking to in Reddit, so a new GM was asking about advice, and they were actually talking about GM driven versus player driven campaigns, and again, it's one of those keywords that, okay, what is a GM driven versus what is a player driven, right? So for me, a player driven is the one who's the players are deciding where the campaign's going. And the GM is definitely doing a lot of improv, right? Because the GM is just, okay, you're going to do this. This is what happens, right? And so a player-driven game mainly is a GM not preparing, period. It's all improv. And again, we go back to the maturity level of your player and your GM. From a maturity level of a GM, you definitely are going to have problems when you're doing improv. And you're going to make mistakes. Go ahead.
Some people, you're going to have to, my advice is to play them both. Find what you're comfortable running. Personally, I vacillate between the two. I play it almost like it's a boat on the water, where, as a GM, I will create a scenario, or there will be an event that happens, and then the players will react to that. And that will be the GM-led beginning of the campaign. And then the next episode, it will be me reacting to what the players have done and the direction the players have decided to go with that. And it goes up and down like that, switching back and forth. That's my personal comfort level at this point in my life. Yeah. That allows me to retain narrative control while still allowing the players to have as much freedom as they can. I've played it both ways. I've given the players absolute freedom and just reacted to what they've done for the whole campaign. And that's been fun. I've had the players react to what I've run, and that's been fun. And both, I've done it with preparation. I've done both as just completely winging it. There is no right or wrong answer other than what keeps the level of stress for you running the lowest and the amount of enjoyment the highest. That's my biggest thing, is do whatever causes you the least amount of stress. If trying to prepare for everything just feels like work instead of fun, don't fucking do that shit. If you get freaked out because you don't have any idea what you're going to do, well, sit down and write some stuff out. If you get freaked out by both, I don't know what advice to give you other than maybe you should be a player.
Yeah, and it seems to me that these mistakes and taboos and things you should never do, they often contradict themselves, right? You should never be prepared, but you should always let the players, do what they want to do, and you should always be sandbox. Well, You can't prepare for sandbox, period. I don't care who you are. You can't prepare for any sandboxing. Because it's the players who kind of drive it.
Yeah.
You know?
They're going to run that shit right off the rails. They will go outside the boundaries of that of that sandbox. They'll start bringing in concrete too. Don't be afraid.
Yep. So, from my point of view, is I think you definitely should be excessive with your world building. Do not be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Create
Never
it.
be afraid of world building.
When you're doing it, understand that when you think about your world building, think about, okay, I'm going to introduce these major NPCs to my world. Always keep in mind, the players might kill them as soon as they meet them. So,
as far as, go ahead.
Keep that in mind, that you don't want to write an amazing backstory of some VP who's going to control the players or be their adversary. And these are his plans. And once,
I say never.
6 months from the date of the game, he's going to be doing this. Don't forward think your world building, right? Think about what is present. Update it as you're running your game, right? So, for example, in my current campaign, there's corporations that are happening. I also have kind of been posting news stories on my site around things that are happening in the world, and the players are taking some of those bits and pieces, right? So I have a calendar already set up of, this is where, on this date, this is what's going to happen. However, if the players interact with any of those situations, that event's not going to happen. So when you're dealing with future events around any of your world building, don't flesh it out. Just put it as a marker, right? This is a milestone that they're trying to achieve. And once you get to that milestone within game, set another milestone of, like, if the players don't interrupt me, I'm going to be doing this.
Plan for events, but don't overplan the future ever. I say ever, but it's really hard to get the players to go along with the future in a straight line. They're not going to do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to use the word never, especially in this episode, but what year is it? Jesus. In the 30 years I've been running Cyberpunk, it has not ever happened where, my plans that I've set down for the future ever come to pass the way I wanted them originally to come to pass.
Also, a quick tip, create a calendar for your game.
That is a good idea.
It definitely, whether the events happen or not, but if you go back in time when you're running a campaign, you can always post those previous events as news items or even hooks within your game. I started doing it probably back in the early 2000s, in which I kind of kept a calendar for my games, because it helps me flesh out those dates
somewhere for a future episode. Because
keep in mind, my calendar is like,
go into that. That's
4
a good idea.
words of this is going to happen on this date, right?
Right, but I mean, your enemies have agendas. Your corporations have schedules they're trying to adhere to that have nothing to do with what the players are doing, but that the players could very well fuck up.
Yep.
Or if not, like, this shit, they're due to demolish this building on this day. It's gonna fucking happen.
Yeah.
Or an earthquake is gonna happen in the Gulf of Japan on this date. It's gonna have worldwide consequences. There you go.
Exactly. And the other thing, and I don't know if this is a little too world building, but for my campaign, there's definitely major NPCs with corporations, but I also kind of write down those NPCs' schedule for the next week or month, right?
That's a good idea too.
The players might okay, we're gonna hijack her when she's going from work to her apartment. Well, guess what? The day before, she left for Paris because she has a corporate meeting there. And granted, I have a corporate job, so I have a little more experience how corporations work and how the inner workings of a corporation. And that's another thing. It's not a taboo. It's something. A reverse of a taboo is something that you should do. Is do a little research on Google and talk to friends who might have certain corporate jobs or have a field that you can get some insight, right? And if they're your friend, you can
friends for in-game details. There you go.
Yep.
Always. It doesn't matter what they're doing. Always be trying to learn as much about the world around you as you can. Just because it makes, even if only, obviously I would want you to use that. I would advise you to use that information for everything. But even if you're just using it for your game, even if that's where the interest for you drops, it doesn't hurt to talk to the guy who works in a hotel and find out how hotels work as far as what they do when they take your order, who comes in and cleans your room, what's that schedule look like, are there people there at night other than just the front desk dude who's miserable? There aren't most of the time. It's a big hotel. It's a small hotel. It's just one miserable dude.
Yep,
I know that from personal experience. But you were saying something about this is my advice for world building. You touched on it briefly, but I want to go into it further. Try not to contradict yourself. In a fantasy game, you can contradict yourself as much as you want. You can say, well, this level of technology over here exists, and over here it's just pure magic. But in a more realistic, a more science-driven game, not that the setting of Cyberpunk is really all that realistic, but it's definitely got its real-world boundaries. Don't introduce something that you're not willing to have affect the rest of the game. And by that, I mean, don't introduce a piece of tech that's so far advanced that it suddenly has repercussions that affect everything else in the game, and you didn't see that coming. Try not to do that. I played in a game where a dude was trying to run a hard science fiction campaign, but he was also a Star Trek fan, and he tried to introduce teleportation. The dude had a major lack of foresight. That changed everything in the game, as it would in the real world. You introduce teleportation to the real world, nothing is ever the same again. The smallest things will be changed. The largest things will be changed. It's completely different. And when it first gets introduced, it won't look like Star Trek. It will be much, much worse.
Yeah.
If you introduce something like the cure for cancer to your game, that's going to have repercussions beyond just, well, Aunt May gets to live. Suddenly cigarette sales skyrocket. Just be very wary when world building. I'm not going to say never, but be wary of things you're adding to the game and how they react, or how they're going to react with the rest of the world, especially if you're running a long-term campaign.
Yep.
That's all.
So let's move on to another taboo mistake that GMs can make, and that is, as a GM, you view your role as kind of the adversary to the players. And
That's
making
one of my
the
nevers.
yeah, and well, I don't think it's a never. Yeah, okay. So there's a caveat to that, right? Because the whole idea that you might have of that adversarial, right, of GM versus players, players might have a different view of what adversarial might be, right?
Sure.
And definitely want to get into examples of things you shouldn't do and versus things you can do. So, and I've had that, right? You've always heard the killer GM coming after you. I've had killer GMs. They are not killers. They definitely kill players, and they definitely do a lot of TPKs.
Wait, they kill players? Holy shit, is that game hardcore?
Yeah. But oftentimes it's the stupidity of the players that leads them into that TPK, right? So, and again, I've seen this more with, I've seen it in Cyberpunk, right? I've definitely,
I mean,
because
I say never, but I also say never to running at cons. And I think it's a different dynamic. Running a game with long-term intentions is not the same as running a con game. Or at least I can't imagine it because I've never run a con game. I've never played the con game. I don't do one-shots. But I would imagine that it's a very different dynamic where, adversarial GMs could possibly be part of the fun of that, trying to, outwit the GM and survive the blah, blah, blah. I can see vaguely conceptually how that could be a thing. As a guy who runs long-term campaigns, though, I really, really balk at the idea that some GMs have out there and some promote that it's the GM's job to fuck over the players.
And again, it's an interpretation of a GM versus a player, right? So for a player, right, a situation in which we talked before, you find yourself naked tied to a gurney at the beginning of the game, which means all your equipment is stripped. Some players might view that as the GM's fucking with me, and he's a killer GM, and he's an adversary to me. Where we've already discussed, it's definitely a start to a scenario. It's bad for the player, and yes, as a player, you get that. What the fuck? Why is he doing this to me? I mean, he's after me. He's after all of us. He's being a jerk because
if that's how the campaign or even a session starts out, if that's the consequences of something the players have done, then I got no problem with that. That's just the game playing out as the story warrants. What I'm talking about, I'm going to preface this by saying, listen up, you primitive screwheads. The Unexpurgated Cyberpunk Ref Guide it should be required reading for every GM out there. It is one of the very few books out there that I think should be required reading for every GM. The other one is Robin Law's Guide to Good Game Mastering, and the third is the Suppressed Transmission books by Kenneth Heat. I don't know how to say his name. I've heard it before, but that's not the point of it. That being said, there is a section in the book, in the Listen Up book, called GM's Dirty Tricks.
By Maxima Mike.
Mike wrote it himself. I love reading it. I hate the lesson that players come away with, or GMs come away with from it.
And they replicate it in red too.
I know, and it's never not going to chap my hide. But then again, like I said, I've spent all my life looking at it from a long-term game running thing, where if you have a problem, talk to the player, communicate, the advice the book gives is like, well, put landmines under their mattress so when they lay down to go to sleep, they just die. And up until recently, I had never thought about it from the idea that this problem player could be somebody at a convention or in a game where a one-shot game where, you know, a problem player really does ruin the whole game for everybody and you never get that time back. So I can see it from that perspective.
Quick injection before you continue. That is another taboo, is ignoring disruptive players. So we'll
you
kind
never
of tie
want
that into that.
Don't ignore destructive players. If you're in a long-term campaign, if they're your friends, communicate with them. In a short-term game, I wouldn't even mess with the passive-aggressive responses that Mike gives for this. They're fun to read, but they're not the advice I would take. I would just tell them to get the fuck out of my table. That's how I deal with that. Like, you can either sit down with the same respect everybody else has brought to the table, or you can go find another table. I'm an old man. I don't have time to deal with that kind of bullshit anymore. But it presents this. It's presented a philosophy of, you know, being an aggressively adversarial GM, where the players are always like so paranoid they can't function. And I think that's a product of like Mike's an older generation of gamer than we are. Like, he's been gaming since the 70s. And that he's not alone in that philosophy. That is a very like Gygaxian, like in a dungeon, everything's going to kill you. You need to be prepared for everything all the time. Mindset. I get it. I've seen too many people come away from reading that, as if that's the way you should treat all your games. And that's the way GMs should treat all their players, is as these super adversarial relationships where it's, you know, GM versus player, and it's like a board game where you're trying to rack up points somehow. I don't know.
Right. I think, all right, so here's my take on that whole situation of disruptive players. Outside of the killer GM, right, is I think humanity are less likely to be confrontational. I don't know what the percentage is, but I believe that there's a lot of people, especially introverts, right, such as myself, who's not going to confront somebody when they're misbehaving. If they're misbehaving really, really bad, yes, I will confront them. But if they're doing something that is tolerable, it's still annoying, but it's tolerable by, you know, the people around me. It's very hard for me to speak up as an introvert. And I think that as a game master, and again, it boils down to maturity, like you say, is, you know, I'm too old to take this bullshit, and I've gotten to the point in my life, yes, I'm too old to take bullshit. So I think as a younger GM, whether you're in your teens, in your 20s, it's definitely a hard situation because of the dynamics of youth, as it were, to confront people. However, it also can spoil a group. And to me, the best solution is to buckle up and definitely confront that situation and tell the player, hey, either behave or get out, right? And even as an adult, I tried to run a D&D game a few years back in which, you know, the boyfriend of one of the players who've never gamed before really annoyed everybody at the table. But it was that hard decision of, well, if I tell the boyfriend to get lost, you're telling the girlfriend to get lost, and she's an asset to the table. So it's very hard, and that's the other problem with when you're dealing with disrupted players, is the dynamics of the outside of the group dynamics, and that's always going to be hard because you like I said, it's hard to confront situations in which, hey, I like you, but your boyfriend's being a jerk in this situation, and
I cannot for the life of me imagine that, like, a passive aggressive solution, like just arbitrarily like murdering his character, just falls from the sky and lands on just your character. Like, I can't believe that that's going to make any part of that situation better.
No. So it's definitely a hard situation to resolve as a GM. In
that situation, I mean, the best advice I would give is first talk to the girlfriend and see if, like, she can talk to him.
Yeah.
Or if she recognizes that there's a problem. And then maybe you guys can double team on the dude and be all like, hey, phrasing, I'm sorry. Hey, this is what gaming is about. I don't think you're quite grasping the concept.
Yeah.
Let me help you. Again, it's just communication. And yeah, you're right. Communication is fucking hard. I'm an old school gamer. I just turned 49 yesterday. Jesus Christ.
Happy birthday!
Oh, don't remind me. But I have, like, severe anxiety about confronting people. Even more so when it's my friends. If you're a stranger, I don't give a fuck. But if you're somebody who, like, I like having in my life, me confronting you about something when there's a problem, oh my God, dude, I can't sleep at night because of that kind of thing. So I get that it's hard, but it's always the best choice.
Yep.
Or you just eliminate the problem altogether. Clean break, if that's a possibility.
And again, I think confrontation, and I haven't done any full research on this, but, I think it might be something that you as a GM, again, doing that research, is look into research of psychology and what is it called? Sociology. Of how to approach somebody, right? So, for example, the whole girlfriend-boyfriend is like approaching the girlfriend and saying, like, does your boyfriend like gaming? I mean, he seems very adversarial to everyone at the table and blah, 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 and she might take it and approach the boyfriend like, they think you're kind of adversarial, and that's the problem, was like learning the language of how to talk to people. And this isn't just in gaming, this is outside of gaming, of trying to work with people in general.
It sucks that you're putting it on like the dude's girlfriend or the boyfriend, whatever, but they're there. The problem is there directly as a result of this other person.
Yep.
And they're going to be the go-between. Like, their bond is generally going to be stronger than your bond.
Yep.
So you want to, like, take the path of least resistance and the path that's going to be the most effective. They're going to know what's going on in this person's life more than that person might be willing to share with you.
Right.
They're going to be able to advise what the best method of approach is and how to rectify the situation. Or they're going to be completely psychotic too, and they're going to just be like, there's no fucking problem. Either he stays, or if he goes, I go, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I mean, it's either way, communication is the best way to figure that stuff out.
So just for you youngins, us 40, 50-year-olds are dealing with the same situations as you guys. So keep that in mind, that it's definitely a generational thing when you're dealing with people.
Will, check the stream
Yeah.
Are we still broadcasting?
I think so. I'm seeing that we are still broadcasting. Why?
Okay, because like all chat, like I had to reload the screen because it said there was a problem with something.
Okay, I can refresh. I see Digital Craze saying you're good.
Craze. Okay, thanks, Craze. I appreciate that. I didn't mean to interrupt everything. Just I got worried there.
They're too intent on listening to us. I definitely saw a drop in viewership that went down to 5 or 4, and then it's now spiked back up to 8. So there might have been a glitch.
Numbers.
Don't worry about the numbers, man. Who cares? We got YouTube to go in and influence people. That's very true. And as long as we're affecting 8 people,
I'm having more. I do this to have a conversation with you. The fact that other people can join in and listen and watch and every now and then interject, that's just icing on the cake.
And also, we're learning from each other, right? Like the whole social contract is, I definitely, when you first posted it, I had a response to it. Got feedback from various people, and then got feedback from you, and we talked it through, and yes, as a person, and this goes for life in general for everybody out there, is you always grow and you learn and you try to understand. At a certain age, it takes a little longer to try to understand it, but you as long as the people who are pointing out the life lesson you need to learn and being patient with you to learn that lesson, I'm happy with. Yeah, so I think we got the whole GM adversarial, and again, it's always a perspective of the players viewing you being a little too heavy-handed with situations, and you trying to push your story along and create your story and present more different threads of that story, right? Which is robbing players of equipment, robbing them of some of their player agency, right? So, for example, if all of a sudden the players did something bad in the corporation, kidnaps them and basically forces them into servitude, which is another concept of and again, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is cyberpunk centric. D&D is something completely different, but for cyberpunk, a corporation taking on the player and kidnapping them and injecting them with cerebral bombs can happen. And players might view that as a GM being too heavy-handed and being adversarial to them to kind of control them and rob them of their agency.
In the middle of a campaign, I would have a much bigger problem with it. But if that's the way the campaign starts, that's just the way the campaign starts.
Well, in the middle of it, in my opinion, it's a consequence of the player's actions, and that's something that you agree with, right?
Well, to an extent. If I show up to session and out of nowhere you tell me that the session begins in that manner, I might have a problem with that. If we role play out them capturing me, that's different.
Right.
And that's where the agency either is or isn't there. In the middle of a campaign, if things just happen to my character that I have no way of avoiding, mitigating, fighting back, that is removal of agency. That is like things just happening to me.
Okay.
As a game, I want there to be some type of, even if the idea that I could escape it is purely farce and just window dressing, I want to at least try. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I played for years under a GM who their big thing, it was a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Had I had average intelligence and average wisdom and low intelligence. And almost every other week, they were mind controlling. Like just over and over again. And I got so fed up with it that I eventually just stopped coming. Right. It stopped being fun for me to come to that game because I wasn't doing anything. I was showing up, and then I was sitting there staring at them playing the game for hours while the GM ran my character. He completely removed any agency I had, and it destroyed the game for me.
And that's a subtle way in which the GM might not be understanding that he is being adversarial, right? In which he views it as a challenge, right, of mind control. So I'm going to mind control this guy. And not understanding, okay, well, I also need to bring out challenges to every single player. And making a player a challenge of other players is not a solution.
No, it's not. And having one guy sitting there for hours, literally unable to do anything, unable to provide any input.
Yep. Which
just ask the dude to leave. Tell him he can go home, that he's not needed there for the rest of the session. So otherwise, I'm just wasting my fucking time.
So this topic leads into another one, which is not having consequences in your game. Which you definitely should, and I think it ties into the whole player agency and GM versus player, right? That you should have consequences. Again, players might view consequences as that adversarial role, and also consequences from robbing the player agency that they're not able to do what they want, right?
There is a difference.
Yep.
Sometimes that difference is hard to suss out, but it's there. And it doesn't even have to do with GM intent most of the time. Most of the time, it has to do with how much interaction that player can still perform. If you take away all their interaction, you have removed their agency, and you might as well just be narrating stories to them. Or you can tell them to stop wasting their time and that they can go do other stuff, because people make time. Time is a commodity. People get invested, and if all of a sudden all that investment is removed, it can kill a game faster than anything else, with the exception making a player feel useless in the game, like on a consistent long-term basis, will kill your game. Hello? Hello?
Hey, sorry, I just had to deal with a cat issue.
Oh, okay. I thought that was me. I was all like,
no.
Everything went real quiet. I'm all like, am I disconnected? Blah, blah, blah.
No, the cat toppled something and got to chase her away. And
bad kitties.
Yeah. Apologies for that.
But don't make the players' minds up for them. Don't tell the player. This is my personal advice. Your players may be into it. Don't tell the players what their character is thinking or how their character is feeling. That above all else should be the one thing the players are always control of, is how their characters react to any given stimulus.
I would disagree.
You can tell them they're in pain, but you can't tell them that they like the color red.
I'm going to have to disagree with that, because I think yesterday or the day before, I had a conversation in which I talked about a situation in which, you're kind of robbing a player of their decision making by doing something like this, right? So here's my example. A player, they're a face man for the group, which means they got to have a high empathy. They're the fixer, corporate, whatever. So they're working off of an empathy of 8 or 9, right?
Sure.
They get into a situation, right? They're confronted with a bunch of enemies. They deal with the enemies, and this player, who's the fixer with an empathy of 8, 70 plus humanity, says, okay, I'm going to torture this guy and I'm going to kill him. Right? From my point of view, okay, your humanity just went down to 30 or 40, which means your empathy is now down to 3 or 4. Are you sure you want to do this?
Pretty big empathy hit.
Well, if that player is torturing somebody and then murdering them at the end,
I have different ideas of what empathy actually means.
So,
but like I said, go ahead.
Again, I think the problem with the game is there's a difference between empathy and charisma, right? The game assumes empathy is charisma, which it's not. Because Ted Bundy... I
don't think the game does. I think players assume that empathy is charisma. Yeah. And I think that's an assumption that's made that the rules don't necessarily support.
Yeah. Well, so to me, torturing and killing somebody means your empathy is low. Is very low.
I think I think empathy is the wrong term for the stat.
Agreed. But you brought up the same thing. It was like Ted Bundy. He had a high charisma.
That motherfucker is.
He had a 3 empathy, right? And I think that's the problem. Is Cyberpunk when they're talking about humanity, it's right. You're dehumanizing the person, and the problem is
you're removing their connection to humanity as a whole.
And I think the skills that are based off of empathy are really more charismatic than empathy, right? It's not about how you feel about people. It's how charismatic you are, right? Your social, your persuasion, your seduction.
I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I toy with the idea of humanity originally being based off of empathy. But once the game starts, once the character's rolled up, I think humanity should be disconnected from the stat it was derived from. I think it should just be its own thing, and it is that way you can take hits to your humanity, but your empathy is going to stay what it is.
Yep.
You can come up with other ways to penalize empathy, but. Yeah.
And I think there's compassionate people out there who are very non-social, non-persuasive.
You've ever listened to the a surgeon sense of humor? Oh my God, dude. You'd be all like, you are like, if you just heard the jokes they tell, you'd think they were the most evil people on the planet. But they literally spend all day, every day, saving people's lives.
Yep. And they're also witness to a lot of death too.
Yeah, they see the worst humanity has to offer, and that's their coping mechanism. Just because you're willing to torture someone to get, in the first place, you have to realize that torture just doesn't work. Reservoir Dogs said it best. You torture a dude long enough, he'll tell you he started the goddamn Chicago fire. That doesn't necessarily make it so.
But again, a player who's doing that, okay, you have no humanity, you have no empathy.
That's because I mean, we've seen. It's a game, and it's going to follow the tropes of things. Just like in real life, if you shoot the gas tank of a car, it's not going to explode. In a game, you might let that happen.
API will definitely cause it.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you're going to get all semantic about it. But you know what I'm trying to say. In a game, we'll let shit happen just for the sake of, we're doing action movie stuff, so action movie stuff happens. So we can, well, in general, if you torture someone, you're a pretty scuzzy person. There's always the caveat of, well, he knows where your loved one is. Your kidnapped child. He kidnapped your child. He knows where the child is being kept. Yeah, your natural reaction might be to start cutting off toes until he tells you. That's not necessarily going to make you that horrible person that the career torturer is. I mean, how many times do our heroes on cop shows or action movies, like, they want to know something, they start beating on the dude? That's torture.
Yeah, but those heroes I view as really not having that high humanity. They have morals, which are not necessarily tied to humanity, right?
You know, that's a fair assessment. I can honestly say that I've never tried to, like, judge John McClane's humanity before. I need to give that some thought.
Because years ago, I had a friend. He played a chaotic evil character, right? And, you know, when presented, you know, again, evil campaigns are a whole different subject.
Oh Jesus, that is its own can of cookies. That
right. However, his character would be like, yeah, if I see women or children hurt, I'm going to defend it. I'm like, but does that make you good? He's like, no, that's just his moral code. He will not allow that to happen, but he will do the most heinous things outside of that. You know, committing, you know, whatever atrocities he decided as a way of doing it. But it's like, oh, yeah, I mean, suppose.
That does beg the question, though, like, does that person indeed have a higher humanity? Does having that code of ethics, does Leon in The Professional have a high empathy? He's a killer. He'll kill people, but he won't kill women or kids. And God help you if you find out you do. If he finds out you do, I mean, that's a topic in and of itself.
Right. So that's an interesting topic that maybe we'll discuss about humanity in a future episode. So let's table that.
Yeah.
So we got about
that's two tabled. That's a good episode.
6. So I'll put that in discussion of humanity versus emp versus charisma. Yeah, that sounds like a good episode that we can get into.
I may have to update Interlock Unlimited. Damn it.
Yeah, added a new attribute. So we got about six other things that I've noted about the taboos, mistakes, etc. of gaming. One is the GM being failing to be a leader. And I think that speaks not only to in-game, but also to the exterior or that out-of-game, right? So I think we talked about disruptive of players. I think players at the table often view the GM, and I've heard the horror stories of bad sessions with players behaving badly, and that the GM
just lets you get completely out of control.
Right. So I think as a never, that's hard, right? So
I mean, I have a hard time thinking of myself as a leader of anything, but there is truth to that. As the GM, it is your job to set the tone. It is your job to, make sure everyone's having a good time, and it's also your job as a GM to safeguard that the environment is a safe place for everyone who's playing. And if one player is being a jerk to everybody else, or even if one player is just constantly harassing another player, that is a problem that you have to deal with. It is the game you're running. The rest of the players are going to follow. They're looking to you for that comfort. You're the arbiter. So, I mean, if you're going to arbiter the rules in game, you're pretty much the one who's going to have to, not always, but most of the time, you're going to have to arbitrate the rules in the outside of gaming environments, in the game room, whatever's going on with that group. You're the one who's going to set what's allowed and what's not. Right.
And I'm kind of on board with that, especially if it's if there's adversarial within or perceived by the GM, right? So there might be some things that aren't perceived by the GM that they might not notice, that I think players really need to talk to their GM and say, yeah, I have a problem with this.
Because sometimes as the GM, you won't notice. You'll just think people are playing, acting out their characters.
Yep. And I think as a GM, and this is another taboo, which is rejecting feedback, is as a GM, you should always listen to your players on things. And again, it's definitely going to be hard from a GM point of view, especially with new groups and new situations, and again, the maturity level you're dealing with is, understanding the dynamics and being able to address the situation. Because if one player is not having fun because of another player, you need to address that immediately, because it will lead to not only hardship for that one player, but it will lead to a breakup of the group. And if it's one player who's disrupting the whole group, that's going to cause the rest of the group's failure, that bad seed needs to be gotten rid of.
Get rid of the bad seeds. Even if really you want to pay attention, when the voices start getting raised, you need to be able to figure out whether they're talking in character and whether all the parties involved are into it, or if one dude's just being a dick. If the dude's being a dick, you gotta curtail that right away, because it will blow up in your face. Like, I have seen players, like, literally, as an example, we were playing a game, and two of the players started talking shit to each other. It started simple enough, like one of the players stole something from another player. It was back in the days when that was actually like a common thing. It was always dickish. There was never a time when it wasn't dickish, but it used to be a lot more accepted than it is now.
It's never been accepted. It's just, it was tolerated a little more back then.
Yeah, it was something that happened. Like, okay, he's playing a goddamn Kinder. Fuck. But the player who was doing the stealing got caught, and the player he was stealing from didn't take it well. But at first, it started as just character on character interaction. I didn't recognize it at first, but it was quickly moving beyond that until suddenly one of the characters, the player who did the stealing said something to the other player, and the other player responded with something innocuous like "Yo mama," like something that I would say to I mean, that's such an innocuous insult that it didn't even register in my book. But he said, "Yo, mama," and the other dude leaped over the table and tackled the dude, and like, brawl was happening right then and there.
Shit.
Dice went everywhere. It was bad. Like, that shit can blow up in your face.
Wow.
Pay attention to what your players are saying and doing. You're not always going to catch it, but you don't want a situation like that happening. It was bad.
That's when you don't realize that, the normal ball busting becomes something out of the
Also, be
ordinary.
very careful who you say "yo mama" to. Apparently, that can be the line you can cross. Apparently,
But Creature Nature brought up a point, which is this is why you have a session 0 and a consent.
absolutely, 100% yes.
But I don't think that always helps, right? Because further into the campaign, situations might happen in which, yes, you talked about that, but from a player dynamic, it kind of can get out of control. And as a GM, like we said, we don't notice it sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, nobody's ever going to be perfect. You're never going to be 100% of the time. We're human beings. We do the best we can.
Right.
I think the session 0. I think the consent. I think those are worthwhile tools, and they should be promoted, in one way or another. And I think, Capricious, you're also right when you say that GMs and players both need to be open to feedback. 100%, I agree with you on that. Everybody needs to be open to feedback.
Yep. And that's one of the topics I think that was brought up was as a taboo is a GM rejecting feedback. And again, feedback is not just what we're talking about, right? Is player dynamic and player what's going on outside of the game, but it's also rejecting feedback within game. And
there's nothing saying that you have to agree with the feedback, but you can't just reject it out of hand. You can't just not listen to, like, in a game. The game is social. We are people in a circle. We are friends. We are cooperating. We are on, as much as human beings can be, we're trying to be on the same page. If somebody doesn't want to be on that page, then the story doesn't work, the game doesn't work, the social contract doesn't work. And people are going to have criticisms. They're going to have suggestions. They're going to say, "Hey, this thing you're doing, you've been doing it for like 4 months now. If I hear you do it, if I hear you say surprise butt sex one more time as a battle cry, I may fucking murder you."
You've been in a game where people have said that as a battle cry? Sorry.
I'm not going to go into any details. I'm not going to point any fingers. I'm saying similar things have happened. And for a while it was funny. And then it was very much not funny.
Got it.
What gets said on a night when everybody's like smoking a lot of weed and drinking a lot of tequila? Like, what's funny then? When you're playing something, innocuous, and what you find funny later are not the same things.
Yeah, tequila can often lead into a lot of regret.
Communication, consent, blah blah blah, and being able to provide feedback. I've got in the Dungeons and Dragons game I'm running right now. One of my very best friends, I'm not running it, I'm playing in it. One of my very best friends is playing a character. Have you ever seen Futurama?
Yes.
The announcer guy, the one who's all like, "Welcome to
Fuck
future."
yes.
That's the voice he gives his character.
Phil Lamar.
Yeah. I love this guy. This guy is one of my oldest and dearest friends. But I've told him, I finally came out and told him, if you play that character with that voice again, I may lose my mind. I will not be responsible for my actions.
Right.
Because it's everybody else is being serious, and then all of a sudden, I feel like somebody's getting ready to. Yeah.
And just as a side note, those who are listening to this podcast and you do not like Futurama, you're dead to me.
Yeah. If you don't like Futurama, you shouldn't be listening to me. We don't have any common. There's no common ground between us.
Definitely not.
It's the single greatest Western adult themed cartoon there ever was.
Western. You mean Western as opposed to Eastern, meaning, Asia?
It's not anime. Well, I'll just say that.
Sure.
They operate on different scales. They're not the same. Western cartoons are typically comedy based, blah blah blah.
All right.
I'm not getting into all that right now. I'm just saying it's Futurama, then it's Venture Brothers, then it's Archer. Everything else. Well, and number 4, there's C-Lab 2021. There's
Here we go,
that.
brother.
And everything else is.
I agree with that.
Yeah, right back at you. Everything else is just there.
Rick and Morty?
That's really hit or miss for me.
Really?
It's Rick and Morty has the same problem that Beavis and Butthead had for me in the 90s. People glommed on to the dumbest moments of it, so you miss the brilliance.
Right.
With Beavis and Butthead, I had to listen to people going, fire, 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 and I am Holio for fucking years. It made me hate the show. If I hear somebody say wubba dub wub wub again, or I'm Pickle Rick, no, that's not the good part of the show.
Mike
that's
Tyson mysteries are not anywhere close. You got Squidbillies.
They're not in the top 5, but it's probably in the top 20. Mike Tyson mysteries were better than Squidbillies.
Oh, to hell with that! I love Squidbillies.
We'll fight.
All right, man. Hopefully you won't get banned from Facebook this time.
Oh no! Oh
no! Or
I like Squidbillies. I liked
the hell is Frylock and Shake and Aqua Teen, yes. Fucking best show,
the
man.
first 2 seasons of that were great, and then it just got really stupid.
Yeah, well. Oh, really? The first 2 seasons weren't stupid?
I mean, they were dumb. They were dumb humor. You're not going to get a lot of intelligent, thought-provoking stuff with Aqua Teen Hunger Force. But they were, dumb and funny in a coherent kind of way.
All right. I think we're getting completely off topic, and granted, it's been a little over 2 hours.
That's a whole nother show.
So there's 4 topics left, and I'm going to just rattle them off real quick, and we can kind of address or trail off onto each one, and then we can end the show. The first, or one of the other ones, is, as a taboo mistake, don't make one of your players a critical player. I.e. that they are required for the game campaign success. I've been guilty of that, and I've used it to quite success.
Yeah, I've been guilty as well.
The other is forgetting to have fun. I kind of agree with that. I mean, that's the one thing that I think is definitely a never.
What is the point of the whole thing? If you're not having fun, chances are nobody else is either.
So I think the
and
never
if you're not having fun, but you
applies to that one.
Still doesn't. Yeah, change needs to be made.
The third one of 4 is don't tell players you fudged rolls, which I found very interesting. I actually watched his diatribe of why you don't want to do that, but we'll get into that. And finally, metagaming. You should never, ever do. So those are the last 4 kind of topics I've seen as things you should never do, and we can kind of address each one of them.
Like face-to-face gaming, I'll admit it. I fudge rolls. I don't care. I never fudge rolls. I fudge rolls in very, very specific circumstances.
So
I fudge rolls if somebody else's fumble is going to be detrimental, like death, to the entire party. I won't let a fumble kill the party. Now, as a caveat to that, I learned from that, and now I just don't have people make rolls where a fumble could kill the party. I just don't do that. So I don't really fudge the dice anymore, but I used to be kind of bad about, like, I'd roll things I'd have players roll shit just to provide a sense of tension. But then if they fumbled, like, it could kill the whole fucking party. And I had that happen once where it was a Star Wars game, and one player's fumble blew up the whole spaceship, killed everybody, ended the campaign. Like 3 sessions in, like we hadn't even like come close to like the first real gooby gobby thing that was going to happen. Just out of nowhere, the campaign's over. So I don't do that anymore. I don't let that happen.
Right. And the person who streamed this, basically they said, do not, and he wasn't necessarily saying do not fudge rolls. He was just saying, do not tell the players you fudge rolls.
Because, that's probably a damn good idea, because you want to keep that suspense.
Yeah, because you don't want to let because his view was, at the end of the game or end of the campaign, you say, oh yeah, guys, I understand you guys defeated this major dragon, blah, blah, blah. However, I fudged the roll on this, so the dragon couldn't do his breath attack, right? During this one climactic scene. Which, because he basically suggested that it kind of robs the players of their accomplishment. Which I can see, but I think, if you're listening to the subject, you definitely don't
thing about digital gaming is you can't fudge your die on Roll20. You just, fuck, there goes the neighborhood.
What you're actually rolling on Roll20? I roll a die and make sure if they hear it on my mic.
Well, I'm the GM. I need to see the player's die rolls.
/GM roll.
Oh, there you go. I could probably do that. That sounds like a lot of extra work.
And you fudge your roll.
I'm lazy. But no. To any players who may be listening, no, I never fudge rolls. Never. It never happens. Don't worry about it. I did way back when I was a bad GM at the start. I don't do it anymore, see?
Right.
So
that was one. Critical player required. I've based, and again, this kind of approaches the subject of favorite character. I was running a D&D campaign back during the beginning of 3.5 of Dungeons & Dragons, in which I kind of allowed my wife to be the main character.
See, here's the thing.
But I did not take away from the other players, right? I did not allow them to not be part of that story and help progress that story. But I kind of made her as kind of the central theme of the whole campaign. Which,
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I'm on top of that, not only can one character... Like, you can decide that one character is going to be the focal point of the campaign, and like everyone else still gets to fucking have all the playtime, all the spotlight, all that equally. But because of this character's circumstance, be it in life path or just whatever, like it can focus on them. Case in point, I had a character. I ran a cyberpunk campaign where one of the characters was he had been genetically modified at birth. He didn't know it until the game was well underway. But he had been genetically modified at birth and stolen away from the program. If you've ever seen the movie Hannah or the TV show Hannah, it was kind of like that. It was done years before that, but the same type of thing where, hey, blah, 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 they experimented on this guy. He's got a little bit extra to his juice, and now the corporations are trying to grab him, and that became a focal point. He was part of this program, and that program was the focal point of the campaign, but it was because, it made him a focal point of the game. Other times, I told you I ran my friend on a solo campaign for years. Well, every now and then, other people would join that campaign. But the campaign was still primarily about him and what he was doing. They would just be added as cast members, and there's nothing wrong with that either. As long as everybody understands that they're coming into a pre-existing campaign. Or they don't. You just treat it as it were. They don't have to know what your focus is. Nobody has to know what your focus is. Hell, you may not even know what your focus is.
Okay.
Sometimes.
The other last one is metagaming. So a GM should never metagame.
Again,
think with metagaming.
I'm not gonna say never.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because players might not understand the situation that's happening within the game, and you might have to do a little bit of metagaming to explain the world, why the dynamics are happening, especially with corporation versus corporation. Why two corporations might not have things, and basically, to me, metagaming is taking in background knowledge that a player probably should have. I don't care for metagaming when it comes to players, right? When a player says, "Oh, you should do this," and when I say
nudge,
this
wink, wink
to another player, because that outside player knows what to do or how to act or whatever, right? And they're and I've had this situation happen with players, which they kind of influenced a player to do a decision because to me that's metagaming. But as a GM, metagaming is different, right? As a GM, metagaming is to explain certain situations and why certain situations are happening. So I don't think that should be frowned upon or a taboo.
Here's the deal. I'm not going to say never. I will say I try to avoid metagaming both as player and GM whenever possible. Now, that might mean that suddenly players overhear a news broadcast or somebody talking on the radio, blah, blah, blah. They may get some weird expositional bullshit vomited at them somehow. But I'm not going to do... that's why I don't like cutscenes. Offstage events. I don't like those because that is the definition of metagaming. Suddenly, I have all this information that my player doesn't have, and you're expecting me to not act on it. As the nature of role playing, occasionally, eventually, metagaming is going to happen. One of the characters will be off doing something on his own. Something will fucking happen to him. The other players overhear that shit. Unless you're spending the whole time off alone or kicking the other players out of the room, metagaming is gonna fucking happen. It's unavoidable. It's just gonna happen. There's extents to it that you'll allow. Sometimes you will kick everybody else out of the room or take the player aside or whatever. But even doing that creates metagaming. All of a sudden, every other player in the room knows there's something fucking up with those two. everybody be on your guard. He's going to come back and he's going to be mind controlled.
Yep.
Something's going to happen. Something is going to happen. So there's no avoiding metagame. But try and minimize it.
And Capricious Nature brings up a point. Like D&D, metagaming within D&D is rampant, right? Because you have the ability to have players get into monster manuals and know the stats and know the abilities, blah, 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 be rule keepers and all this other stuff. Cyberpunk is a little different, right? So there are kind of rules and things that you kind of, prevent.
There's no magic in Cyberpunk, so you're not going to run into something that breaks the laws of physics, and the players aren't going to be prepared for it.
Right.
You'll run into shit that will overpower you, or that you're not, like, comes at you from an angle you weren't ready for. But like with D&D, like,
yeah. Right, so
there's going to be lore in the game. Your character, the average dude in the village, he may not know what a fucking what are those things that pretend to be boxes with
mimics?
Mimics. He might not know what a fucking mimic is, but he's probably heard at least legends of, dragons. He may have even heard of a beholder once. Like, there's this crazy eyeball thing out there. It shoots rays at you that you just disintegrate into a pile of goo. He's not going to know anything specific about it, but there'll be legends.
Yeah,
but then there'll also be the weird shit that just lives in dungeons that nobody who fucking has ever encountered has ever come and told the tale. So, and you're right.
Go ahead. Finish your thought, and I'll start.
I was just telling Capricious that, yeah, he's right. Like, the metagaming in D&D is bad.
Yeah, I think we just have...
Even if it weren't for the monster manuals, like, people who've never read a monster manual in their life, some of them might have read all the Forgotten Realms novels. That gives you more than enough information.
Yeah, I think we're down to Capricious Nature and Digital Craze and you and me on Twitch. So, and again, for prosperity, Cyberpunk is a different animal, right? Because Cyberpunk, okay, this is a corporate guard. Guess what? There's no standard stats for them. Cyberpunk Red has them, but as a GM, you can tweak them very easily, and a player isn't going to complain too much. Versus Dungeons and Dragons, if you change...
the player he's a security guard. We have an idea of what to expect. He's probably got some kind of weapon on him, and probably light armor and a radio. Probably not much else.
True, but, he might have...
Except that guy's like security or Arasaka Elite, and he's going to fuck you up.
Right, and they could have API, DP, all the various types of ammos. So that's what gives Cyberpunk the advantage over, like, Dungeons & Dragons when it comes to metagaming. For D&D, it's very hard, right? So, and again... this can get into a problem with the GM doing a lot more world building. Is okay, well, you heard that a beholder causes anti-magic, or his various rays in his eyes do this, and this.
Driving that car is awful.
That was me. Dude, have you gone through that fence? That fence is horrible. Go through that fence in game right now. Try to go through that fence on your basic character. When he first starts out. Okay.
I'll concede. I was just like, Jesus. I haven't seen him driving that embarrassing since Austin Powers, when he tries to
trust me. This is my good driving. All right. You look at my bad driving, and I'm like killing like 4 or 5 pedestrians at a time. Anyways, so when you're dealing with those systems, right, in which monsters have a system and stats and abilities that are dictated by the book.
Oh yeah, everything is written down and codified and
As a GM, and again, this is going to take a little bit of world building for you to do outside, whatever system you're working with, whether it's D&D, Shadowrun, I think has certain stats associated with it. Whatever game you're working with that has stats within a book that a player has access to, you can always say, that's the folklore, and change those abilities and change those stats. Because when a player says, whoa, 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 they can't do that, or they're more susceptible to this, is like, no, that's folklore. You read folklore. And change
the answer is I'm the GM and I don't care what that fucking book says.
Right. And granted,
I got no problem with any GM who says that. I'm all, you go.
And that's why you're always going to get that player. Oh, hey, you're screwing with me. It's player versus GM, and you're just fucking with me. It's like, no, this is how beholders are going to act for the rest of the game and rest of the campaign and every campaign I work in. So yeah, I think
the horror games I run, like, if I'm running a Dungeons and Dragons game, it's going to be a horror game. The monsters are not going to be anything you see in the book. They may look like it, but man, they're going to be so much worse and so much more disturbing.
Yeah, so
because if you live in that world, you would be terrified all the time.
Yeah, because you're growing up as a peasant, and peasants are one level or first level. Throughout the game, they can easily be killed by these monsters, and really, I think the problem is...
Yeah, I mean, what do you mean the chair can eat me?
Yeah, and I think that's why you and me both love Cyberpunk, is that everything's going to kill you, no matter how powerful you get.
Cyberpunk is the Australia of gaming. Cyberpunk 2020, that is. Cyberpunk Red is like the New Zealand.
They want to kill you, but they'll give you a chance before they actually do.
Everybody sounds like Australia and New Zealand a little, for the most part, but there's nothing venomous. There's no animals there that'll kill you.
So I think this was a pretty good episode. We definitely reached out and hit a lot of the topics that I did or found on the various interwebs of what you should never do and what's very taboo. Again, take it as a grain of salt. Do not listen to us. This is our opinions and advice we can give you. You are going to fuck up, especially if you're a new GM.
Never say never,
and
except sometimes.
Yeah, and my advice is any of these topics we talked about, take it, understand the downfalls of it from our advice and whoever else says this is a bad thing. Try it out. See if it works for your group. See how you can make it better in that situation. Do not take it as a ultimatum that you should never do.
Nothing we say is gospel. Nothing anyone says is gospel, even the gospel.
And again, we're talking from 30, 40 years plus of gaming experience of a maturity level. You might be 10 years, a year. If you're like in that range, you are going to test those boundaries and experiment and understand exactly what's going on.
You may have never run a game in your life and are just thinking about it.
Yeah.
My advice to you, my advice on this subject is the same as my advice on anything gaming related. Figure out what works for you. Figure out what works for your players. Talk to each other and go from there.
And I'm going to go the opposite of what these people have said, in which they've said never. My suggestion is always take in feedback, always learn, always change and adapt to your situation.
Wait, there are people out there who are actually saying never listen to criticism?
Not necessarily criticism, but
Or
never
listen to feedback? Because Jesus Christ, I thought that was just like, I thought that was the thing, is like there are GMs out there who don't.
They said never not take criticism, right? Which, yes. But we talked about that, right? There's certain criticism you should take in, and there's criticism that you shouldn't take in. My point is, always listen to the criticism, right? As opposed to never.
Listen. Even if you don't agree with it, listen to it. Because somebody came to that point of view for a reason.
Yep.
Their reason may not be valid, but you should at least hear it out.
And those are the things you should always do, right? Which is, I think a lot of those places, they look at the negative, so therefore they apply the negative. But always look into DM tips on how to improve. And always experiment when you listen to mistakes.
Never stop broadening your view of anything. And take everything, like, don't get silly with it. By all means, get silly with your game if that's what you like, but take everything with a grain of salt. If you hear somebody, if your research leads you down some weird paths, that's okay. Just try and stay grounded.
Yep.
You know what you want out of your game. You know the boundaries that the world you're creating is setting. In any gaming world you create, the boundaries are going to be much broader than you believe. They're also going to be much more restrictive in some ways, and it's up to you to figure out where those boundaries lie.
Yep.
And it should always be tempered with you having fun and your group having fun.
Yep. You might make mistakes with that whole fun thing. I've played in games in the past that it hasn't always been fun, especially when the GM does player versus player. Try to avoid that player versus player.
Try to avoid player versus player. It sounds
not always
fun,
good.
but it never works out well.
It does not. I
have 30 years of playing. I have never seen that work out for the best. And sometimes it leads to motherfuckers blowing up at your table and beating the shit out of each other.
I have 32-year grudge around a session that went player versus player that didn't go well.
Oh, I
to
believe
this
it.
day,
I still
have that grudge. They're still my friends, but I still will be like, you guys are fucking assholes for doing that shit. Anyways, I think that's gonna wrap us up. So let's do our little outro. Thank you to Rob with Cyberpunk Uncensored for hosting us on his Twitch channel. You can check out cyberpunkuncensored.com. He's got a lot of great stuff there. I am Cybersmily, aka Will. You can find me on various avenues of the interwebs. My site is cybersmily.net. That's without an E at the end, so keep that in mind. I did that on purpose. I have tons of little apps that you can use to help with your games and some resources.
He is the coding man.
Yeah, I am the coding man. I am not the, shall we say, background and campaign
Dude, I could never do what you do.
That's my counterpart here, Wisdom, does, because he is the content man. So give your little advertisement, boy.
All right, I am Wisdom00, otherwise known as Derek, or my friends call me D. I am at Datafortress2020.com, where I don't spend any time world building at all, except every waking moment. Yeah, check it out if you're interested in Cyberpunk 2020 or just the cyberpunk genre itself. You'll find something that interests you. Again, thank you to Rob at Cyberpunk Uncensored. Thank you to everyone who tunes in and listens, both live and on YouTube. You make doing all this worthwhile.
Yeah, and those for you on YouTube, subscribe and like this video so we get some feedback. I do try to keep up with the comments, so if you leave a comment, I will try to reply. Wisdom, I don't know about, but
if you guys have any subjects or questions for us, throw it at us. We'll talk about just about anything.
Yep. So in the future episodes, we are definitely going to continue to dive into game theory. I think we came up with 2 topics tonight on feature.
It was awesome.
Also more reviews as well as other interviews with people within the cyberpunk community that we're going to try to get in and shoot the shit with. So stay tuned, guys. Thank you for those who continue to view us. So we'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Have a great one.
Night, guys.